Okay, so we're in chapter 3. We're going to look at 3 and 4 today in Forbidden Schoolhouse. And today we made the predictions about what we thought Prudence was going to do with her school. Is she going to close it down? Is she going to keep it open? Is she going to make it just for African-American girls? Is she going to keep it mixed? Is she just going to have Sarah? All of those predictions. You guys did an awesome job at that. So we're going to take a look at today and have some questions at the end of it as well. In the next few days, Prudence was busy. She told people in Canterbury that she had to make a trip to Boston to visit schools and purchase teaching supplies, she said. Bundled in her winter woolens with her bag in hand, she boarded the stagecoach and spent most of the day rattling along the country roads that led from Connecticut 90 miles north to Massachusetts. Remember, she's going up there to visit the editor of the newspaper, Mr. Garrison. In Boston, she dismounted, registered at the Marlborough Hotel, and quickly penned a note. January 29, 1833. Mr. Garrison, the lady that wrote you a short time since would inform you that she is now in town and should be very thankful if you would call and see her a few moments this evening at 6 o'clock. As the day wore on, Prudence waited. She was a single woman, alone in a strange city. Beyond his name, his profession, and the fact that some people called him a madman, she knew nothing about the man she was about to meet. She didn't even know what he looked like. Prudence wasn't a timid woman. Still, she must have been relieved when a slender, balding, scholarly-looking young man in wire spectacles politely introduced himself as William Lloyd Garrison. Mr. Garrison must have been also relieved to see Prudence. Ever since he'd decided to work for the immediate abolition of slavery, Garrison had been fighting a hard and lonely battle. In the North and South, people said he was a crazy fanatic. He'd been fined and imprisoned for calling slave-trading sea captains murderers and robbers. One Southern legislator had offered a reward for his capture, dead or alive. And those were only some of Mr. Garrison's problems. Did you guys catch that? He'd been fined and imprisoned for calling slave-trading captains murderers and robbers. That's just incredible to be imprisoned for that. Here's a picture of Mr. William Lloyd Garrison. In 1833, many Americans still supported slavery. Many others hated both slavery and abolitionists. They thought slavery was evil, but feared that giving immediate freedom to millions of poor, undereducated black slaves might hurt the U.S. economy, flood the country with beggars and criminals, and cause a serious break between the North and the South. So again, we're seeing that kind of gray area of slavery where people thought it was morally wrong, but they also didn't want to abolish it right away because they thought it would tear apart the economy, that it wouldn't be good for America, that all the slaves would be poor and bring criminal, life into the world. And so we see this, this counterbalance between it's right to do, but we actually don't want it done, or it's wrong to do, but we want to continue doing it. It's this fine line. So few white Americans supported the abolitionist cause that in 1831, only 25 of Garrison's 500 subscribers to the Liberator were white. So he had 500 people subscribed to his newspaper, and 25 of them were white. And to me, this story is like, I can imagine being him and being very discouraged by this. Like, okay, I'm making this newspaper to try and make a difference, to try and get politicians and people to change their mind, and the only people that are reading this are either free or enslaved Africans. Can't really do anything in politics. This could be really discouraging. And yet, this is so cool. Prudence read it. You don't know what that small thing, that thing that God is calling you to do, might feel really discouraging. And yet, here it is. Prudence needed him to write that. And many, many other people did too. But, this is really cool. Things were so bad that sometimes in low moments, Garrison must have felt that he was trying to change the world single-handedly. When a friend urged him to keep more cool, the editor explained in quotes, "I need to be all on fire, for I have mountains of ice that need to be melted." Ooh, what a great line. Metaphor and a hyperbole, right? Mountains of ice that need to be melted, and then a metaphor. I need to be all on fire. He's like, I can't be a little passionate. I can't be kind of crazy. I can't be like, oh, that guy is against slavery. I have to be like a madman. I have to be a fanatic. I have to be crazy about this because I have mountains of ice to melt. What a way to live your life. To melt these mountains. Ooh, I like how the author repeated that in the next line to kind of transition. Garrison needed allies, and Prudence was ready, willing, and able to help. Besides, she was a teacher. That was particularly important. If Black people were ever going to win equal rights and good jobs in America, they needed an education. It is valuable. It is so valuable to so many people. Never take it for granted. Garrison and his supporters knew that, but African Americans found that learning was very hard to come by. So few U.S. schools had colleges were willing to teach Black pupils that in 1865, when the Civil War finally ended, only 1 out of every 20 African Americans could read. So 1 out of 20 could read when the Civil War ended. It was not highly prioritized. It was illegal in parts of the United States. And then it was just difficult for them to obtain, just like Sarah's trying to get from Prudence. In the 1830s, Southerners were so afraid that educated Blacks might rebel against slavery that they passed laws against teaching African Americans. In South Carolina, a white person who taught a Black person to read could be sentenced to 6 months in prison and a $100 fine. That's crazy. So just even helping, just even being able to, give them that opportunity as a white person, you were going to be put into prison, you're going to be fined, it's going to be on your record. That's a really bad thing. If a free African American taught another Black person to read, the punishment was 50 lashes and a $50 fine. The sentence for a slave who dared to teach his own children to read was 50 strokes from the whip. So slaves, free or Black, were beaten if they taught either another Black person or even their own children to read. Of course, they still did under secret, darkness and in secret and all of that, which is just a testament to their great courage. In the North, where many feared the educated Blacks might take jobs from white workers, Black children were seldom allowed to enter into white schools. White teachers rarely taught Black pupils, and schools for African Americans were scarce. Philadelphia, the home of 20,000 Blacks, was typical. There were only 3 schools and 4 teachers for all the African American children in the entire city. So there was 20,000 Blacks in the city with 3 schools and 4 teachers. Okay, so this is like one-room schoolhouse situation for 20,000. Well, not all of them were kids. Now, Prudence was planning to do something about this terrible problem. Not only was she planning to open a school for African American girls, but she was offering to teach advanced grammar, math, and science, the sort of subjects that would eventually allow her Black students to teach other African American pupils. This is higher education. Remember, we talked about this is high school and a little beyond. It was like a dream come true. Garrison was enthusiastic. He wanted to help. As they sat together in the Marlborough Hotel that evening, he advised Prudence. He encouraged her. He also gave her the names of several Black families whose daughters might come to her school. One family lived in Providence, and Prudence immediately caught the stagecoach headed south to Rhode Island. The address was in a seedy, run-down city neighborhood. A lot of middle-class white women wouldn't have gone near that place, but Prudence cautiously picked her way past the garbage, the shabby buildings, the bars, and entered a boarding house run by Mrs. Elizabeth Hammond. It was well worth the trip. Mrs. Hammond, a widow, welcomed the schoolteacher with open arms. Thanks to a small inheritance and careful saving, she could afford to give her 2 daughters a good education. Mrs. Hammond immediately asked Prudence to sign up her girls, 9-year-old Sarah and 17-year-old Anne Eliza, as pupils. Then she introduced Prudence to 3 other Black families who also wanted to educate their daughters. So never underestimate a parent's desire, right, to get their child into something better in life. To African Americans like these, school was not a burden or a chore. It was a gateway to a new, exciting world of knowledge. It was a means of showing that African Americans were just as smart as white people. Above all, it was, in the words of a group of Black school planners, a road to position in responsibility and trust, distinction and happiness. Booker T. Washington, a former slave and founder of one of the first colleges for Blacks, expressed the feeling of many when he said school was, end quote, the greatest place on earth. The families Prudence met in Rhode Island were hungry for learning, and Prudence was thrilled. I think, she wrote to Garrison, I shall be able to obtain 6 scholars in Providence. I think that we've taken school for granted a lot. I mean, even myself as a kid. And I think that this little time apart really helps us value the school building, the friendships, the relationships that we build, the time that it takes out of our day. And it helps us kind of see what so many people throughout history have said. Education, school, this whole idea of learning and socializing all together is something that, it's a blessing. It's a privilege. And we're kind of struggling with it right now. So I think this is a good time to kind of reflect on that and be like, wow, I don't want to take it for granted in the future. 6 wasn't enough for a school, but it was a good start. By the time Prudence stepped through her own front door the following Saturday evening, it looked as if the new Crandall School for African American Girls was going to become a reality. Of course, after the uproar over Sarah, Prudence had to be careful. She still didn't dare tell most of the people in Canterbury what she was planning. It was too soon for that. But it was quite hard to stay quiet. Her ideas for the new school were exciting, and on Monday she told her good friends, the factory owner Daniel Packer, all about it. He was not enthusiastic. Opening a school for young black women was certainly a praiseworthy project, Mr. Packer said, but it might not work. Prudence might not be able to get enough pupils. The school might fail. He was afraid Prudence might injure herself in the undertaking. Prudence had to admit that Packer had a point. She did need more students. So she packed a bag, boarded a steamboat, and headed off to New York to recruit a few more pupils. Thanks to letters of introduction from William Lloyd Garrison and the help of a local black minister, the trip was a success. In a few days, Prudence had signed up a total of 20 students from Providence, New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. And that wasn't all. On the boat back to Connecticut, she struck up a conversation with a middle-aged New York businessman named Arthur Tappan. Tappan was rich. He was also a passionate abolitionist. Like his famous ancestor, Benjamin Franklin, he believed African Americans should be educated. He listened to Prudence's plans and offered to help in any way he could. He even teased her a little. Maybe he'd come to school along with her other pupils, he said. There was only one thing left to do. As soon as she got home, Prudence told her family all about her plans. She knew that they opposed slavery. She knew that they believed in educating women. But how would they feel about the risk that Prudence was about to take? How would they feel about having their daughter open a school for black girls? Would they think the whole project was a crazy gamble? One brother, Reuben, had serious doubts. Prudence's father, Pardon, was afraid it might interfere with his peace and quietness. Still, on the whole, the family approved. Remember, they were a Quaker family. Things were going even better than Prudence might have expected. The pieces were all falling into place. The building was ready. The students were waiting. All Prudence had to do now was open the new school. See an idiom there, the pieces were falling into place, right? Figurative language going on there. Chapter 4, Moses had a black wife. Interesting. That's an interesting title for this chapter. I don't know if it's going to be a Bible reference, if it's going to be like a race reference, if it's going to be like a burn, that she uses against somebody. It kind of sounds like something Sojourner Truth, right, would throw into her Ain't I a Woman speech. So I don't know. We'll see. On a chilly day in February, Prudence told her white students that their classes at the Crandall School were about to end. At the beginning of the spring term, she explained, her school would accept only African American pupils. Whoa, did you catch that? Did you predict that? So she didn't mix. She saw that as going to be a problem. So she just decided, I'm sorry, this school is no longer for you because you're not going to want to go here, or your parents aren't going to want to send you. I'm opening up an African American school. That is gutsy for sure. I wonder that there's such an impact here. It says here, the news swept through the town. Notice that word choice that the authors use. Swept through the town. So number one, figurative language, because, personification, but also it swept through the town. That word choice really gives us a dynamic, really powerful description of this didn't just become a little gossip. It just swept through, it cleaned out. It was the only thing people were talking about. On the night of February 24th, 4 of the most powerful men in Canterbury held an emergency meeting to discuss Prudence's new school. Uh-oh, people are getting riled about this. The 2 lawyers in the group, Daniel Frost Jr. and Rufus Adams, were joined by the town physician, Dr. Andrew Harris, and by Richard Fenner, one of Canterbury's most important businessmen. All 4 agreed that the situation was dangerous, and they rapidly formulated a plan. The situation was dangerous. Yes, educating women, educating black women, dangerous. I love it. What a great line, right? It's dangerous to do. Indeed. At 9 a.m. the next morning, they were standing on Prudence's doorstep. She invited them in. As they sat in her parlor, stiff and formal in their starched shirts and dark coats, Prudence scanned their faces. She knew them all. Mr. Frost, Mr. Adams, and Dr. Harris were on the school's board of visitors. Dr. Harris lived across the street, and he'd helped teach her brother Reuben medicine. Dr. Adams was Canterbury's Justice of the Peace, which is like their judge, and Mr. Frost had founded a temperance society to prevent people from drinking alcohol. They were all prominent citizens, and Prudence must have suspected that the visit had something to do with her project. Notice here that these are not bad men. Remember, we talk about history is not black and white. These are not bad, awful men. These are good, upstanding citizens in their town. They're helping people. They helped Prudence herself. These are people that she knew. These are her neighbors, her friends, somebody that, is the local doctor. And yet there's going to be something. There's going to be this tension in here. There's going to be something that they're not going to agree with that you and I today would find very surprising. The men didn't keep her in suspense for very long. They had come to deliver a warning. Word choice right there. It's cause and effect, right? If Prudence Crandall opened a school for African Americans in Canterbury, they would, in quote, do everything in their power to destroy the undertaking. Powerful, godly, Christian men, prominent in the town, come into your living room and they threaten you. If you do this, we will do everything in our power to destroy it. God sometimes calls people to things that are kind of unfathomable. Indy's joining our lesson today. And it's always incredible to me the courage and the determination that he gives to people. Things that this would be hard. Some of us can't even stand up to someone who's a little unkind to us sometimes in the day, and we just, are annoyed by them all day. And it's like, talk about bullying, right? And Prudence she's a strong woman. The words were brutal. The attack was alarming. Prudence had never faced such malice before. Malice is a great word choice for deep hatred, deep anger. She needed advice, and she needed it fast. When her visitors left, she seized her pen and dashed off the letter to the Reverend Simeon Jocelyn, an abolitionist minister that she'd met through William Lloyd Garrison. Only a couple years earlier, in 1831, the Reverend, like a pastor or a minister, had faced a similar predicament. He'd almost been assaulted, which would be to be attacked, by an angry mob when he had tried to open a school for African American men in New Haven, Connecticut. Maybe he could help. Prudence's pen sped over the paper. Personification. Mr. Jocelyn, sir, she wrote, your opinion and advice will be thankfully received. Write to me immediately. Please, write to me immediately. The days sped by, and then on March 1st, there was another knock. Dr. Harris, Mr. Frost, Mr. Adams, and Mr. Fenner were on the doorstep again. Hi, Indy. Hey, babe. Minutes later, the men were in the school parlor, and they had something to say. Daniel Frost, a good persuasive speaker, acted as the spokesman. Now, as the other men sat silently, he tried to talk Prudence into giving up her plan to open a school for black girls. There were no threats this time. Instead, his tone was quiet. It was reasonable. He said he had no objection to educating black people, Frost explained. He just didn't want to educate them in his own hometown. Fascinating. So the whole tone has changed. Remember, we were learning right before we left on break, we were learning all about persuasive techniques, right? So they come in really hot. They come in kind of like, don't do this. We're going to threaten you. We're going to scare you. And she's like, I'm not going to be scared. So they're like, okay, bad cop. Now we're going to be good cop. We're going to come in with a different kind of attitude. They come in quiet, reasonable. I'm not against educating black people. Like, please don't get me wrong. I'm not racist. This is not a race issue. I'm just against them being educated in my town. Smooth. hypocritical. It was important for Miss Crandall to understand, he said, that opening a school for blacks was a bad idea. For one thing, it might encourage African Americans to think that they were just as good as white people. Are you hearing what I'm hearing? Let me read this line again. It was important for Miss Crandall to understand. I mean, look at this is condescending, right? It's important for you to understand. You don't understand this, so I'm going to educate you on this. Ooh. Opening a school for blacks was a bad idea. For one, it might encourage African Americans to think that they were just as good as white people. Woo. Do you not see, even in this, the way the devil he weaves his webs? Remember, we talked about this earlier in the year when we were talking about the Irish poem that we listened to. He weaves this web of lies with truth, right? And so they're kind of doing that. Like, I don't have a problem with this. It's okay. I just don't want it with this. Or don't you understand that this could be a problem because this could happen? And you're sitting there kind of like in this alternate reality of, like, why would that be a bad thing? Wait, I'm sorry. I thought we believed in equality and freedom and all men are created equal. I mean, those are the foundations of our nation. And yet this guy is saying it might encourage them to think they're on the same playing field. That was dangerous, he said, because there was no telling what such uppity black folks might do. Okay, succeed, be loving, be successful, have great families, all the things that we see. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's really, guys, it's unbelievable. They might hurt whites and damage property, and worst of all, they might want to marry white Americans. Oh, yes, the just absolute horror. Good grief. What is the word coming to if we see each other on the same playing field? And do you see the this is very deep-rooted prejudice that Connecticut is having. These are men in Connecticut. These are the feelings in the North, in a New England Puritan colony. As Mr. Frost talked on Prudence Remembered a Bible Story, it's going to be a bird. Prudence remembered a Bible story because in the book of Exodus, she'd read that Moses had married a woman with dark complexion. Apparently, the great Jewish leader had cared about skin color less than the 4 annoying small-town notables sitting in her parlor did. The more Frost talked, the more absurd his ideas seemed, and Prudence had had enough. As her visitors babbled on about the danger of letting blacks and whites marry, Prudence said sharply, Moses had a black wife. Mic drop. This is just fantastic. God gives us words. God gives us wisdom when, it says here, it came to mind, the story from the Bible came to her mind. So cool. The words were startling. Saying them was scandalous. 19th century women were supposed to be gentle, submissive creatures who always obeyed men. I mean, she's rocking boats all over the place. She's rocking women's rights. She's rocking her expectations from society. She's rocking this whole, race and prejudice thing. And just, what a woman. With a single cutting remark, she'd shown that Frost's argument about race were unfounded and ridiculous. It was a shocking, unladylike thing to do, and it wasn't something her male visitors were likely to forgive or to forget. All right, if you are not falling in love with Prudence Crandall, you don't have a heart, because this is powerful stuff. She is an incredible woman. Let's just look at her again, because sometimes we can think that these people kind of look silly or whatever for their fashion and all that stuff. I just want you to look at her. As a powerful woman. That is a woman doing God's mission for people in her community. It's pretty powerful. All right, comprehension question. We're going to come up with a couple more tomorrow, but I really want you to be thinking about the word ladylike. Okay? That got thrown out in our lesson today. She would not have been considered with her kind of witty, snarky, punch back remark about Moses having a black wife. That would not have been considered ladylike. We talked a lot on Valentine's Day about chivalry. We talked about being a lady. We talk about being respectful. We talk about all these things. How does that resonate with our beliefs? Guys and girls, gentlemen, you're in this. What is a gentleman? What is a lady? I want you to really think about that. When they say ladylike, what is ladylike? What do we define ladylike as? Because there is a calling. There is a higher calling that God calls us to. We talked about that. I mean, the Proverbs woman is, it is an ideal that God has placed before us. Would the Proverbs woman have behaved like Prudence Crandall? That's the question we're going to ask. So gentlemen, you're going to weigh in on this. Ladies, I want you to really be thinking about this for yourself. Is Prudence Crandall being ladylike? Did she do something wrong? Did she do something right? Do we have to redefine what is ladylike today? Is ladylike today different than it was in the 19th century? Or has ladylike always been a certain way according to God's ideal and people have just misinterpreted it? Great discussion. Very much looking forward to it tomorrow. So anyways, thank you for reading with me, you guys, and have a great day.